This is Dave Litton and welcome to Module 2. In this module we'll be covering programs and portfolio management. Programs are really baskets of projects, if you will, and a portfolio can contain projects, programs and business as usual. So let's make a start. Okay, first off, let's look at projects versus programs. Now, the act of managing a program management, is defined as the coordinated management of projects and change management activities in order to achieve beneficial change. So you can see immediately that a program consists of a basket, if you will, of projects. But just like projects, it's all about managing change in order to realize benefits. Projects within a program can be run in series or in parallel or both. And programs can therefore be continuous and ongoing. Now there's an important difference, if you will, in that you can have projects starting and finishing one after the other, or in parallel in some way, either directly in parallel, but more often than not, when a particular project is partway finished, then it might be right to start a new project. Also, you've probably all heard of programs that are continuous and ongoing. I suppose an example here would be where you have a continuous improvement program, usually sponsored by one of the most senior managers in your organization, your CEO, and it's all about making your organization more efficient, productive, and in effect getting it right first time. Okay, so we know what a project looks like. It has a series of activities. Here's a little snapshot of a Gantt chart, and these together create products or deliverables. It's these deliverables that are then handed over to the business as usual or operational management aspects of an organisation for the benefits to be realised. So a program is a group of related projects and change management activities that together achieve beneficial change for an organisation. You can see how the objectives of program management and the program itself are very tightly related. So what does a program look like? Well, as we know, it'll be several projects. I've just shown some overlap here on 4 projects as an example. All of the projects contribute to the same strategic objective. One of the programs for which I was the program manager was a program which changed our entire organisation from a product focus to a service focus. And as you might imagine, the changes in that were quite large. Groups would disappear and form in different groups. Traditional departments would be broken apart and all given a customer focus. So although there were many projects being run, they were all reporting back into the program, all playing their part, if you will, to meet and contribute to the strategic directive, in the case I just mentioned, of changing the organisation from a product focus to a service delivery focus. Each of the projects, of course, still had deliverables, and indeed the whole program would still have deliverables. And as you know, for both projects and programs, the objective here is to deliver change. And when that change has been delivered, this will lead to new outcomes. Now, an outcome means you've actually got the products and you're using them in a new way. And over a period of time, this will lead to the realization of benefits. From the work done in the previous module, we know that typically a standalone project does not hand over all of its deliverables until the end, and therefore in a project, the benefits that are realized are nearly always after the project is finished. Whereas with a program, because you have several different projects, many of these projects would quite naturally finish during the time frame of the program, and therefore the deliverables, or end products if you will be handed over to the operational area, and therefore it's highly likely, in fact quite normal, that some benefits will be realised during the life of the program. However, just like projects, once the entire program is complete, benefits will continue to come on stream and be realised. Okay, so let's look at the difference between projects and programs. Well, we covered this in the last module, so I'll quickly take you through this. Projects have a beginning and an end, a predefined output, tend to have shorter timescales in relationship to programs. Now, that's an important point here. Many people might define a program as a timescale which is always longer than a project. Well, that is typically so, but it's not always the case. So projects tend to have shorter timescales than programs. Everything, of course, is relative. Just like anything in life, you can have small and large projects, and you can have small and large programs. A project, however, does have a clear development path, simply because we know what the output is. We know the functionality that needs to be met and the products and their criteria that need to be met. So projects tend to be well bounded with a clear scope. And the benefits are realised in business as usual. Just the same, by the way, as programs. Let's now check them out. Unlike projects, programs tend to be vision driven. What this means is, at the very beginning of a program, a vision statement is created, and it articulates what the organisation will look like and behave like at some distant point in the future. So at the beginning of a program, it's very unlikely that we will know exactly what this new state looks like. It's merely a vision which is articulated early on and used as a benchmark, if you will, against which to manage the program. Therefore, a program has an unclear path. The example I like to use here, although perhaps a little sensitive, is finding a cure for a pernicious disease. At the beginning of the program, your vision is to either get rid of the disease entirely by finding a cure or to minimise the amount of people that are infected by it. You have no idea how you're going to do that, because if you did, you could have projects within it and you could clearly define exactly what the products would be in order to fix it. So you can see in this example, a medical one, if you will, programs have a vision of what the future will look like, but no clear path of how to get there. And by the same token, of course, therefore programs often have an uncertain timescale. Because of these first three aspects, if you will, programs are higher risk than projects. Not only because they may be bigger or that the impact of failing will be larger, but also because of the complexity of programs. You'll have more risks and often, therefore, higher risks because the probability will be less certain. You have complex relationships or interrelationships, if you will, between the projects, the activities, the staff, and so on and so forth. Programs will occur in a dynamic environment simply because we don't know what the path is. Therefore, projects will be added or modified or even taken away throughout the life of the program. As more is known about what the program must deliver, then that will automatically cause projects and directions to modify and to change. A program has both strategic and business as usual benefits. The business as usual benefits will be realised within one or more or many of the departments or groups, if you will, of the organisation involved. But strategic benefits will also occur. For example, if an organisation does find a cure for a pernicious disease and it's a for-profit organisation, then highly likely they will make more money. But also, of course, they'll be positioning themselves as an organisation that has the skill, knowledge, talent and wherewithal to actually help cure such diseases. And this would maybe allow them to enter different markets, just as an invented example. Now, as I said previously, programs can have benefits occurring or being realised during their lifetime as well as after. Now, if a program has a program manager and projects have a project manager, and we know about senior management being involved, what does that path look like? Well, something like this. Here's you and I, the project manager, and the project manager, if this project formed part of a program, would of course and naturally report into the program manager. This has some benefits for the project manager, because if the project forms part of a program, it's highly likely the program manager will already know certain aspects of the project. Early on, when we're looking at the concept and definition, the program manager may be able to give the project manager a full definition description, either in the form of a project brief or requirements, because the program manager will know the part that project plays within the program. Now, there's a senior sponsor, of course, and the program manager, of course, may report directly to the senior sponsor. There's another option, however, and that's that you have what's called a program board. Normally, the senior sponsor will head up that program board, and in which case the program manager reports into the program board rather than just to an individual. Just be aware, depending on the nature of programs, it may be a single individual or what's called a program board. So what are the benefits from using program management? Just a word of caution here, it doesn't mean that projects are the lowly form of programs. Not at all. Projects are often the absolute right vehicle to introduce and manage change. But sometimes programs are the right choice. So let's assume, for the examples I'm going to share with you here, that program management is the right thing to do, and here's the benefits. A definition, if you will, of a program is that it is a tool used for achieving strategic change within an organisation via a coordinated set of projects. So where can programs help, and why might you want to choose one rather than just a selection of projects? Well, one example is that where you believe during the life of whether it's a project or a program that there's a high probability of change or changes coming down. And if you do have an environment where your mechanism for delivering change is highly likely to change, then a program is the better way of managing it, since programs are more flexible and adaptable, and the benefit of using them is that they can cope with a high probability of change. Where you have scarce resources, imagine if a collection of projects, if you will, all vying for the resources they need, and it's almost like a battle and the strongest wins. Whereas if you've got the program as the outer shell, if you will, coordinating all of the projects, then it can maximize the use of any scarce resources by prioritizing projects or rearranging the schedule so that, if you will, you're doing resource load balancing across the whole of the program, thereby making maximum use of any scarce resources. Where there's a high degree of uncertainty, take for example my choice of a program trying to find a cure for a particular disease. I think you'd all agree that that has a lot of uncertainty about it, compared and contrast to a project which is there to implement a system in a particular area. Where there's high risk, programs are far better at managing high levels of risk. We'll see how the program manager plays a key part in this. I mentioned about scarce resources. You can do load balancing and you can schedule them and make best use. It's similar with high risk. When you've got a lot of high risks, you can prioritise projects and the use of skills and their scheduling to help manage such risk. Where there's complexity in terms of design interfaces, an example here might be many different skills needed to develop a wide range of different products where specialist knowledge is key. Or it might be a complex interaction between internal and external staff. Where there's overall complexity, one or several projects on their own would likely drown in a complex environment when there is complexity, whereas a program can be organised to deal with complexity. Where there's unclear outcomes, I guess this ties back to uncertainty, probably very similar here. However, uncertainty could be referring to the projects to be used within the program, whereas unclear outcomes really says that the organisation at this point in time is not sure about what outcome they need. What does the service on the levels of products look like? What do we need in order to realise the benefits? That would be unclear outcomes. And interestingly, where there are common products, again, it's simply that programs can better manage an array of different products, since those products emanate from one or more projects. So let's see exactly what programs allow you to do. Number one, they can increase the effective and focused response to strategic initiatives. Sounds a bit of a mouthful, doesn't it? But just think about it. If you've got a strategic initiative in my example, if you remember, to change from a product-focused organisation to a service-focused organisation, then a program was far more effective in allowing us to realise that. And by the way, just for the record, that's exactly what happened in the program that I mentioned previously. The organisation did indeed change from a product focus to a service focus. An interesting story is it meant I lost my job because I was running an engineering group which then needed to morph into different parts of the new organisation. Not to worry though, I was very quickly offered a new position. What about another benefit of programs? Able to coordinate initiatives and align project goals. Again, this is a fairly deep topic here about how this would happen within a program. But see it this way. The program manager, having the big picture, can align projects or schedule them or prioritize them, if you will, so that it maximizes the goals or objectives that need to be met by the program. Program management benefits focus and balance on the whole value chain. Little bit of jargon here, value chain. But again, it's merely talking about prioritizing and trading off, if you will. You could well see how certain departments or groups within the new organisation would be seen as more important or that need to be brought online first, and so on and so forth. That's how programs can be helpful. They provide more effective management of resources, tying back to this, if you will, in that if you only got a few specialist areas of resources, programs can optimise them and therefore provide more effective management of them. Programs allow you to start, define, fast-track or even terminate program projects. Yes, see the basket of projects, if you will, within a program as being dynamic and flexible, and that you can start particular projects where you think they need to, and by the way also end where they need to. Program management allows you to tweak, if you will, or define or refine any projects, and also fast-track certain projects if that makes sense, for particular benefits that need to be realised early, as an example, or partway through realising that a project is no longer contributing and shouldn't be finished, and you can terminate particular projects within the program. Because of the fact that programs manage several projects, then also they can manage the interdependencies or relationships between each project. For example, which project should start first, which should start second, and so on. Also, if there's any delay between one project and another. You might need project A, for example, to start first, but once the specification has been agreed, you could then start project B. That's an example of what we mean by interdependencies. Of course, interdependencies could also be resources. The interfaces within each project, programs can manage that as well. You may, for example, have several projects all needing to liaise with a particular group, and this would be an example of interfaces, and of course business as usual impacts. Now just think about that. Suppose you are running a program where the many deliverables will impact many parts of the operational area. Which one should happen first? Which benefits should be brought online later? Answers to questions like that can be managed within a program. And in fact what we're trying to do here, if you think about a program, is to minimise the impact to business as usual. You don't want too much delivered too soon. You'd want to have a controlled flow of implementation, if you will, and programs are very good at that. So there's another benefit. Manage issues or risks across the program. Yes, you see, one of the analogies I like to paint is imagine that you're the governor of a group of islands in some wonderful part of the world. And that on each of these islands you appoint, let's call them a mayor or a manager for the want of a better word, who looks after the interests of their particular islands. As a governor, you need to look at the islands as a whole. And therefore, whereas the manager of a particular island would manage a particular risk, as a governor, you might see that that risk is commonly shared across two or more islands. So you would be able to manage it across the whole sphere, if you will, of the islands. And of course that goes for issues. Just imagine as governor of these islands, what you're looking for is a free flow of information and value, and so that as a collective set, they can thrive, prosper, and provide a great living environment for those who inhabit the islands. So it's a nice analogy that you can keep in your mind of the difference between programs and projects, if you will. And you can see here how managing issues and risks at that level will be very beneficial. You can align corporate strategy to each program project, point it, if you will, flavour it or refine it so that it fits beautifully with the overall corporate strategy that the program is following. Another benefit, the ability to manage conflicting demands with available resources. Well, this touches on the benefit of using a program is to manage scarce resources, but also the conflicting business demands. You can well imagine each business operational area all banging the table, wanting their projects and their benefits and their activities done first. Here the program manager can take the balanced view. And the reason why they can take that balanced view is because programs are used to achieve strategic change and therefore aligned to the strategic direction of the entire organisation. Programs provide more effective delivery of change. Yes, effective and efficient, because you are balancing the project's schedules and timescales with an eye on the overall strategic direction and the balancing and scheduling of the products flowing into the business as usual areas, therefore making it the most effective delivery of the change. Gain early benefits. Yes, indeed. It goes back to the point that the program manager will design the schedule of projects such that those that are needed early can be delivered early. Now, one of the big things about managing change is to keep people content and happy. You've probably heard of the change curve, where initially change is resisted because we as human beings are programmed to resist change for very good reasons. But here in our modern world, we need to help, therefore, the individuals within an organisation go through that change curve. One of the early benefits that might be seen as important to do first is perhaps selling the benefits of the programme, communicating with all of the staff within the organisation, so helping them all through the change curve. So early delivery of, let's call it, public relations type projects where you communicate and therefore raise the awareness and set expectations and raise morale about the new change coming will allow you to gain such early benefits. It's an interesting thought, isn't it, that I've just touched on, and that's that with projects we tend to think of them producing products which by and large are things that you can hold, taste, shape, move, use, etc. But some projects might be about changing perception, and certainly within a program, because of the vast change that's coming, then some projects might simply be communication types of projects, where the products emanating from them might be presentations, conferences, emails, intraweb websites, keeping everyone up to date and so on. Okay, let's look at one more. Another benefit of program management is the ability to focus on implementation and embedding of outputs in the business. Well, what does this mean? It means that once you've got a new product, let's say it's a new computer system and it's part of a program. So the project will deliver it, install it, test it and get it accepted, and now you've got a new computer system with folks newly trained possibly who are now using it. Well, that's one thing, that's the start. But to realise benefits, it may well mean that they've got to get used to it, they've got to get more efficient and effective at using that new computer system. And that's what we mean by embedding the outputs in the business. Embedding could be as simple, of course, as just delivering training. The benefit of program management that we've already mentioned, of course, is that benefits can be realised both during the program and after it. So let's now look at some of the challenges we would come across for the project manager. Well, the first one is rather an interesting one. As you can see here, the project manager normally reports into a project board. This would be someone headed up by the executive of a project board who owns the business case, and representatives from the user and the supplier community. For a standalone project, the chain of command is easy and straightforward. The project manager reports into the project board. They authorise the project manager and they give feedback and direct and authorise the project manager. But if the project's within a program, then the project manager also needs to report into the program manager. Therefore, there could be a dichotomy here, a pull, if you will, of two chains of command. Interestingly, one of the ways to get around that is to make the program manager the head of the project board. In other words, the same individual as the executive and therefore owning the business case. The program manager could then report upwards, not shown on this diagram, to the sponsor, if you will, and we've fixed our chain of command. So in summary, one of the challenges is often chain of command between the project board and the program manager. Number 2. So again, taking this from the perspective of the project manager, they will have one of the projects within the program. But there are other projects, Project 2, Project 3, Project 4, and so on. And therefore, there is an impact between the other projects in terms of scope what their budget is, how they're scheduled, what resources they need, and what their deliverables are. Therefore, any problems or issues on these other projects may impact and affect your particular project in terms of any of these areas. These problems or issues are totally outside the scope of the control of this particular project manager. However, as you might expect, this particular project manager still has to manage such impacts with regard to aspects such as the scope of the project, its budget, schedule, resources and deliverables. As an example, let's imagine that Project 3, for whatever reason, is unable to deliver one of its many products. And as a consequence of that, the program manager says, well, in which case we'll add that to your particular project. You can now see that your scope has increased. And of course, that'll have knock-on consequences on your budget, on your schedule, on the resources you've got, and of course on the deliverables. You've just got a new one as an example here. Just building on this point before we move on, you can see that in effect the program manager is often more remote than the relationship between the project manager and their project board. And you can see that occurring here as a consequence of changing one or more of the other projects and that impacting a specific project within the program. And while we're talking about challenges, let's talk at some of the aspects that the program manager has to deal with, but therefore could become a challenge for any particular project within that program. Common risks. I've mentioned that it's an advantage for the program manager to manage any risks which are common. For example, if your project had a risk about the skill sets of, let's say, software engineering, but also other projects also had similar risks of the knowledge and experience, if you will, responsible for software engineering, then it would make sense for the program manager to manage that, since he or she would be doing it for 2 or more projects within the program. But as a project manager, of course, you've now got that risk being managed by the program manager, and therefore how well they manage it, what the impacts might be, who's responsible for reporting back to the program manager, are those risks being managed properly, and so on, can be outside the grasp of a project manager. Now, if you have an experienced and knowledgeable program manager, that won't actually be a problem in and of itself, apart from the fact that the project manager is trying to manage his or her project with a risk within it, which is being managed by the program manager. I'm sure you can see how that might make life slightly more difficult for the project manager. Complex change control. Again, you may well have changes requested within your particular project, but the program manager is looking at those changes across the whole program. And very often you would have a change control board set up deliberately, not just to consider the change in the context of your project, but across the whole of the program. Is it advantageous? What are the impacts? What are the benefits of saying yes to it? Should you say yes, or what have you? Increased communication. Not only as a project manager will you need to communicate within your project, you'll also be getting and giving communication to the program manager and receiving communication back from other projects if they're relevant to you. So like it or not, you'll be having more reports flying about for sure, and you'll have to take cognizance of a more complex array of communication channels. More stakeholders, by the same token really, since your project may be delivering a particular product to a particular business area, you may find that that product within the context of the program is also being delivered to another business area. So in effect, you haven't just got one point of contact with the operational manager of one, let's say, department or group, but of many. Because programs also work at a strategic level, then you will find you'll need to work with other stakeholders, possibly not directly related to your particular project products, but merely because those products help realize a broader range of benefits across the organization. So somewhat similar to increased communication. Project plan alignment. Your project plan will be created by you, but it'll be aligned within the program. This may cause the start and finish dates to be adjusted, or it may cause the phases or stages within your project to need to be delayed or fast-tracked. Again, as the program proceeds, you may well find that the program manager, in managing it, needs to make changes to the way in which your project fits or aligns with the other projects. And then finally, considering changes, here's our friend the program manager up here. I've mentioned already that as viewed from the project manager, that the program manager tends to be more remote. Not because they're a remote individual, but simply because they are managing a whole tranche, if you will, of projects. The project manager will tend to get less advice and guidance because it's not a one-on-one business relationship. The project manager has to share the time of the program manager with the other projects within the portfolio. I've already mentioned project alignment by virtue of the fact that you may need your project plan updated to align with the program schedule. So in effect, this is another challenge from the project manager, having to be more flexible or to make more changes to the schedule based on changing priorities and schedules at program level. All of these mean that there is an increased responsibility upon the part of the project manager, as opposed to a project manager managing a standalone project. Okay, so programs are good things. There's many benefits for them, but just be aware there are some challenges. I don't think you should see these as downsides, but merely things that you need to plan to manage. So the word challenges is the right word. Okay, let's now quickly zoom up to the highest level and look at organisational challenges and relationships. Now, we've yet to talk about portfolios, that's coming up in a minute, but just see where everything fits. Operations, this is your business as usual areas across your organisation. It's certainly true that the project's products or deliverables, whether they're standalone or within a program, get passed to the operational area, business as usual, where they're then used to realise benefits. If your project is part of a program, then in which case the project's products will be delivered into operations as part of the program. And a portfolio, as we'll learn shortly, can consist of programs and projects. So in other words, there's a relationship between a portfolio and a project standalone into operations, as well as a portfolio into a program via the project into operations. And as we'll learn very shortly, a portfolio of, let's call it activities for the moment, will have a relationship directly into operations. More of that shortly. Meanwhile, let's focus on the challenges. First of all, programs, even more importantly than projects, if you will, have the need for decisions to be made. Decisions made at the highest level. Since programs have a strategic direction, then programs will need the buy-in, support and championing of your CEO or managing director downwards. Programs need very strong leadership because of their broad scope and nature across the whole of the organisation. This needs to be leadership from the very top, not just from middle management. The worst thing that can happen is a program which is not entirely bought into by your most senior and therefore your most powerful people, because they could in effect thwart or stop the program. They must be driven from the very top. People don't like change. That's a fact of life. That's the way we're hardwired, and we've got to deal with that, frankly, at many levels, including projects, of course. But in particular, since the change from a program will be broader and wider, then the challenges relating to programs are higher, because you'll have a greater number of people disliking change and probably disliking it at a very much more intense level. After all, don't forget, changing the organisation may mean letting people go in an extreme situation, or retraining, or giving people new job titles and new responsibilities and roles. Now, they might have to take them because they've got no option. So ignoring the fact that we don't like change as a species, it may well be that folks are forced, if you will, to take on new roles for the greater good, but it doesn't mean they're going to look forward to it. So managing people through change is a large challenge within programs. They need empowered staff. Another reason why change should be managed, particularly in terms of those involved within the change or those who will be affected by it. You can't get this done by the force of management and leadership alone. You need to know that your staff not only are behind you on this, but also have the relevant power or authority to carry out their part that they're playing within this large change. Another challenge is there enough capacity and capability? Perhaps we could see capacity as the number of skills that are needed in the new organisation, and capability is sufficient knowledge and skills for the new organisation. So it's about numbers and knowledge and skills, if you will. By the way, if the answer to one or more of these is no, then one or more of the projects within the programme might be involved in hiring new staff, training new staff, changing the balance between permanent employers and contractors, and so on and so forth. The change may be too great. Now that's an interesting point, isn't it? What do you do about that? This may cause decisions to be made, and it's a challenge, to slow down the implementation, to make the change manageable, particularly if the problem with the change being too great is too much too soon. But what if the amount of change is too great for the organisation? May not just be about too much too soon, but the amount of change is far too complex and will lead to the organisation breaking itself apart. Again, another reason why you may need to stagger what we call tranches within a programme. Collection of projects is a tranche, if you will, to make sure that we don't get too much too soon and that the level of complexity is best managed so that people have a chance to be good at the way in which the new organisation works, so we don't destroy or break the organisation as a result of delivering the programme. Imagine dealing with customers and suppliers, and while this change is going on, there's poor communication or misunderstood deliveries or misunderstanding between who should be working with them, then you could cause those suppliers, or even worse, customers, to go elsewhere, in which case the change may be too great from a perspective that you've actually lost business rather than gained benefits. Conflict over scarce resources, we've touched on that more than once. It's certainly a challenge. It may well be you don't have enough resources and you may have to hire them or use contractors, either of which does give you some challenges in bringing them up to speed, getting them into the team and bringing them to becoming productive members of the various teams. Programs by their very nature tend to be a large investment. They cost more, if you will, and relatively over a long time period as compared against individual projects. That's the nature of the beast, if you will. And another reason, because of the large investment and the long time period, that the programs need to be driven from the top so that we've got strong leadership and full buy-in. Finally, changing culture is different. This is not just about people not liking change, but changing the way in which the organisation functions, the dynamics, if you will, of the culture itself. This too can take time to bed in. So there's the main organisational challenges of running a programme. Typical questions on the exam, for example, might ask you to come up with 3 or 4 of these, so gather together ones that you feel most comfortable about explaining briefly. Let's focus now on the programme manager. Now, if you remember my analogy of a group of islands, that would be the programme manager, if you will, trying to make the best of scarce resources and prioritising them across projects, as well as managing common risks and issues across the projects. The programme manager needs to have a shared vision and needs to impart that shared vision within the portfolio of projects. We know that there's a relationship here between programme boards, project boards and projects. We touched on that in terms of the individuals involved, and this is one of the challenges of the programme manager. So a programme manager typically would be full-time on a given programme. Simply because of the scale and complexity of it, having a part-time programme manager would be a very high risk indeed. Delivery of the capability. Let's remind ourselves that the projects within a programme deliver products into operational areas, and that is the start of that operational area being capable to deliver some new or modified service, if you will. So the programme manager is focusing on the delivery of the capability, as well, of course, of the products, but fundamentally their game is making sure that those products are embedded and they're in good shape to realise the benefits. The programme manager forms partnership and communication with the business itself, not just a project board, but also the organisation's main business. After all, a programme has a programme business case, and that business case strategic in nature, links directly on the change that the business needs and where and when they need to be once the program is finished. So there's a very strong relationship. Partnership is a better word than merely just communication with those owning the business. Program manager coordinates and monitors the program as a whole. We've touched several times on the fact that the program manager, like the governor of a group of islands, needs to make sure that all of the islands are having their benefits realised. As an example, each of them having a postal service or a hospital, providing medical services, having sufficient income, allowing the inhabitants of the island to live. So if you looked at the Gantt chart of a program, then you'd see that that consists of many different projects with complex interactions and interrelationships. And the program manager, just like a project manager does at a lower level, will be tracking and monitoring performance. What's been achieved, what hasn't been achieved, what should have been achieved, what are the variances, what corrective actions need to be done at a program level. It's probably important to mention at this juncture that the program manager is not just managing the portfolio of projects, but doing other things outside of that, the very nature of the program itself, like communication and partnership with the business and so on and so forth. Don't confuse the word program manager with a term that you may have come across called project director. A project director looks after a group of projects which might have some commonality, but their outputs don't go into one area, for an example. It just makes sense that that person is directing all of the projects. It's different to a program. The program manager has proactive intervention and decision making, keeping ahead of the curve, if you will, knowing when to provide support, guidance or direction to particular projects, and making decisions about the entire portfolio, as well as managing common risks and issues and communication aspects. And the program manager reports in to the program sponsor. Okay, so let's talk about some of these common responsibilities of a program manager. You can see here I've named project A, B and C, and the program manager needs to be responsible for managing any inter-project relationships. The program manager will be responsible for any inter-project risks where a given risk is common to two or more projects, communication across the whole program, across all or some of the projects, or different communication messages to particular projects within the program. Resources, balancing resources, using scarce resources wisely, rescheduling projects, prioritizing them. You may find, let's use software engineering as an example here. You may have many software engineers within your organization, but some of them will be more senior than others. Some will have more knowledge, skills and experience, and yet others may have experience of software engineering within certain products or industries. So the program manager is trying to balance all of these issues across the whole program. And aligning projects, scheduling them, prioritizing them, if you will. So you can see the program manager is definitely much more than a senior project manager. Okay, keeping to program manager then. The program manager defines the governance, how the portfolio of projects and the program itself will be governed. The program manager creates the program plans, determines the schedules and the amount of controls at program level and at individual project level. The program manager manages the interdependencies, as I've said, between the various projects, be they schedule, risk, issue, communication and so on, as mentioned over here, and manages the entire budget of the program. The program manager ensures integrity of all of the projects within the program. Integrity here merely meaning that the projects are the right type, delivering the right products at the right time and in the right business areas, if you will. The program manager facilitates project staff appointments. Well, that is often the case. Facilitate may mean directly employ them or appoint them, or it might be advise resource owners of which project staff would be most appropriate, and certainly when they're needed and how long they will stay, and so on and so forth. The program manager acts as a manager and mentor to the project managers. I've said that they tend to be more remote simply because they're managing all of the projects, but certainly the program manager should be seen as a business partner from the perspective of a project manager and someone who will spare time to actually mentor you, to help you and assist you as and when needed. The program manager is in effect the resource manager across all of the projects. Even though the program manager may not own the resources, they still have their own line managers, if you will. It's the program manager's responsibility to make sure that you're doing load balancing, if you will, of all of the resources, human by the way, as well as non-human, such as equipment, facilities, tools and so on, making sure they're balanced across all of the projects within the program portfolio. They're responsible for managing communications, risks and issues, as we've talked several times already, and the program manager needs a high level of political acumen, a reason, if you will, why just because you're a project manager, you shouldn't necessarily see your career path as becoming a program manager. You may be a talented and successful project manager, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your career route is to move into program management. Maybe your career route is to take on larger and more complex projects. Here's one example. Political acumen may not be your thing. Frankly, it's not mine either. I've never been a political animal. And although I was a program manager for a period of time, I did find that it was quite challenging because of this. Challenging for me at an individual level, simply because of political acumen. I enjoyed better having my focus on the team. So I was always a better project manager than I was program manager. Indeed, I ended up being a senior project manager, which was exactly the right career path for me. I merely bring this point up now so that you can consider that as well. After you become a successful project management professional, where you go next with your career. Now let's touch on portfolio management. This may be something you've heard about, but it's important you understand what it is and how it differs from, for example, program management, projects and business as usual. Starting off with a definition, portfolio management is the selection in the first place of the projects, prioritization of the projects and control of the projects within an organisation. However, it's not just projects, it's selection, prioritization and control of the programs in line with its and their strategic objectives and the capability to deliver. Now the goal here is to balance, again, there's that key word, change initiatives and business as usual while optimizing return on investment. That last sentence is important. It's what differentiates a portfolio from a program. Within any particular organisation at a particular time, there will be many change initiatives. What should happen first? What are the highest priorities? What about business as usual? We don't want to interrupt business as usual at all. The aim here should be to have a minimum impact on business as usual while delivering this change and hence optimising the return on investment of your portfolio. So, a portfolio. What is it? It's a grouping of an organisation's projects and programs, while recognising it's dealing also with business as usual. A portfolio is a set of projects or programs that have no interdependencies, may share resources, but do not share a common objective. So one of the advantages and the reasons why you'd want to set them up as a portfolio is because they don't share a common objective. Just a point to be made here, portfolios can be managed and are normally managed at an organisational level, but they can be managed at a program or functional level. For example, you could have your organisational engineering manager running a portfolio within engineering. Portfolio management is concerned with managing the interdependencies and priorities between projects and programs. You see, we're now lifting ourselves up. It's not just the projects within the programs, it's also standalone projects. So when and why should you use portfolio management? The first is timing. Where an organisation, let's suppose, only has certain resources to do certain things, and if you've got a collection of standalone projects and programs with projects in them, then a portfolio can be useful to actually line up the start and finish, the scheduling, if you will, of the projects and programs. You can get capacity bottlenecks. This might be certain skill sets, if you will, where all of the projects and programs are competing for a particular skill set, if you will, and you've only got so many of them. Managing the whole thing at a portfolio level can be a way of getting through capacity bottlenecks. Where you have scarce or limited resources, this may well be about the knowledge, skills and experience of people versus the number of people you have for each knowledge, skill and experience set. And portfolios are also able to balance between the risk and return of the various projects and programs. See the return as the business case, if you will, the investment when the benefits are occurring versus the amount of risk in delivering that particular return. So let's now look at a typical portfolio structure. Right at the very highest level within an organisation, you have your strategic objectives and targets, and therefore the realisation of strategic level benefits, if you will, where the organisation is leading itself to under the direction of the managing director or your CEO. These strategic objectives and targets are, I would say, always used by senior management, who are seeking a mix of projects and programs to deliver such strategic objectives, however constrained by limited resources. This is a key reason why you would use a portfolio, by the way. So, coming down from these strategic objectives and targets, you have, let's say, one of many programs. Program A, as I've called it in this case, and underneath Program A, it has Project A and Project B. Project A and Project B may indeed have sub-projects underneath each of them. Now, that's a new word I've used here, sub-project. It may well be that Project A is a very large project and it has certain key deliverables which is best delegated to a project smaller in scope and size, if you will. So Program A is one of the programs. There may be another program called Program B, here using Project C and Project D. Within a typical organisation, however, there may also be simply standalone projects, shown here as Project E. So you can see the big picture here of why portfolios can be so powerful. You've still got your strategic objectives and targets, but you've got several programs, each with different projects within them and standalone projects. So how do you coordinate them all? Well, here's business as usual, and we coordinate it via what's called portfolio management. I'm sure you knew that was coming. So in essence, the typical generic structure of a portfolio looks something like this, all delivering into business as usual. So let's look at the steps to setting up and delivering a portfolio. Starts at the very highest level, as you may have gathered from the previous slide, reviewing the strategic objectives. From that emanates the need to identify and prioritise what contributory projects and programs you will harness, if you will, to your portfolio. It involves screening, analysis and appraisal to help identify these projects and programs. It will involve resources, timing, cash flow, risks and benefits. In other words, using these metrics to analyse and appraise which projects and programs should contribute to the portfolio. Having got that, assess the appetite, that's a good word, and capacity for change, considering the resources. How much do we want the change, and do we have the capacity and capability to carry it out? There may be good reasons, by the way, for deciding not to go ahead with a portfolio simply because it's the wrong time to go through such change and it would be better done at a later point. Assuming we're proceeding, authorise the highest priority projects and programs within given organisational resource limitations. I told you that's a key word. It's all about that. It's overcoming resource bottlenecks. What we mean by highest priority projects and programs is, of course, the outcomes we need first and the benefits to be derived or realised from them. Next up, manage the interdependencies between projects and programs, aligning them much the same way as a program manager manages the interdependencies of the projects within their program. We're now doing this at portfolio level, and the interdependencies relate to projects within programs, programs against each other, and standalone projects. And then finally, review and realign the portfolio to adjust to changing circumstances. As you deliver products and realise benefits and the outside world could change, then changing circumstances may mean you'll be, if you like, managing change within the portfolio. And you'd adjust the portfolio to such things as constraints. It could be money, it could be time, risk, return on investment, and the benefits themselves. So as I've said, sometimes it makes sense to manage portfolios rather than just manage individual programs and projects. What exactly are the benefits? Now, larger organisations are more likely to use portfolio management, as you might imagine, because smaller organisations won't have such challenging projects and programs within them. That's really the reason here. First benefit. There's a strategic link between programs, projects and business as usual for the organisational link upwards to the overall business objectives. So as we've said, the main benefit here of using a portfolio is to balance this, keeping your business objectives centre stage while considering programs, projects and your business as usual or operational areas. Another benefit, common to all governance principles, methods and tools. We're all using the same tools. We're all going about managing this change using the same method, and we're following the same principles. In case you don't realise it, much like PRINCE2 as a framework for successful projects, there's also a framework for successful programs, again with its principles, methods and tools included. So a large benefit of managing projects as a portfolio is because of this common way that we're going about managing change. Another benefit of managing projects as a portfolio is that it gives a total high-level view of work underway to make informed choices and judgments and allocate appropriate resources. We've covered that point many times. It's obviously a key benefit. Optimise portfolio balance of risks and their contingencies versus return on investment. Finding that balance, if you will. Another benefit is optimum balance between projects and business as usual, the operational areas, for the allocation of available organisational resource, while at the same time avoiding capacity bottlenecks. And finally, efficient integration of projects' products, the deliverables, into business as usual. Because you're harmonising it and coordinating it at portfolio level, this will be the most efficient way of integrating them, or embedding them, if you will, into the operational areas. Good. Well, let's now touch on the lifecycle differences between projects and programs. Starting with a typical project lifecycle, let me just take you through this diagram first. I've got a key here of some of these symbols. I'll explain each as we go. But before we do, let's remind ourselves a lifecycle defines the interrelated phases of either a project or a program or a portfolio and provides a structure for governing the progression of work. You can see some of the common terms here. So in a typical project lifecycle, you'd have the concept phase, the definition phase, the implementation phase, or development as it's called. And ultimately, as the project finishes, you'll do handover of the project products and close the project down in a controlled manner. Gate reviews occur normally at the end of each phase. And the word gate here should give you a clue. You need to pass through this gate review before you can go on to the next phase. And typically, once you've passed through it, there's no going back. During certain phases, particularly development if you will, there's often stage reviews because you may split this down into stages. Again, remember we covered that briefly in Module 1. Here's a couple shown as an example. Now, as part of closing down the project, you would want to have a review of how the project went, called a post-project review. And it forms part of handover and closure, where the end product is passed into the operational area or business as usual. Then the end product is now used or operated as intended for the rest of its life. Imagine, if you will, it's a new computer system or a new building. Computer systems tend to last no more than a few years. Buildings can last for hundreds of years. Okay, let's now look at what's called the extended project life cycle. Very important you understand the differences. Hopefully you understood what a project life cycle is. It's up to the point where the project is closed. The extended project life cycle merely refers to including the realization of benefits. And here you've got benefit reviews occurring at different points. The final benefit review aligning with the final outcome and benefits for the entire project. you can see here that the end product of a project will be in operational use, which is why the benefits often can't be fully realised until it's been used for some period of time. Indeed, if the benefits are, let's imagine, increased profits or increased cash, then you obviously couldn't get that until the end product was used and sold, if you will, to get that extra revenue returning into the organisation. But we know that there's products within a project, and indeed it's these, the end product, that we hand over. Now, therefore, although you may realise benefits, let's say within a few months of the products being in operational use, the products will continue to be used until their end of life, where the product will be terminated. If this was a building, this is when it gets knocked down. If it's a piece of software, this is when support for the user community is no longer offered and it's archived. It's terminated. So therefore, this product that's terminated, when did it start its life? Well, answer, at the very beginning, during concept. Think of it as a human being, if you will. This is the conception, and here's where you pass on. Not a pleasant thought. So that's the product life cycle. Please make sure you understand the differences here. The project life cycle finishes when the project's finished. You can have something called an extended project life cycle, which finishes when the benefits are fully realised. But the products is the longest of all, starting from the very beginning until the product is no longer needed or used. This is often called cradle to grave, if you will. The Americans have got an even more humorous one, womb to tomb. But anyway, however, I'm sure this diagram will help clarify all of these three aspects, as well as giving you a good understanding how the reviews occur during these life cycles. Let's move on to programs then. Somewhat similar. Here's the program life cycle. Again, you'll have these typical reviews. Again, programs will go at program level through a concept phase and a definition phase. However, when it comes to development or implementation, then the program is typically broken into what's called tranches. Tranches will consist of a basket, if you will, of projects, all relevant to and focused and aligned to the objective of that particular tranche. Do you remember I talked earlier about some of the projects within a program might be about communication, doing public relationship to help everyone get through the change? Well, you might well have a series of projects within a tranche just about that. So tranches in and of themselves can take on different characteristics. It might be because they're doing a similar thing, it might be because the products are the same, or it might be that the products are the same type, and so on. However, you can see that stage reviews would certainly occur at the end of each tranche. They may even occur within each tranches because there will be several projects. But for clarity, I've just shown them at the end of every tranche. And when all of the projects are delivered within a program, the program, of course, is also closed. And programs should have reviews of all of the projects and of the program itself. Now, because programs very often deliver products during their life cycle and those products start to realise benefits, you may have benefit reviews within the program. I've just shown one here as an example. Let's imagine once we've got tranche 2, then this delivers some new capability to operational areas and benefits are now starting to be realised. But we haven't quite finished yet. Something called the extended program life cycle, very similar, if you will, to projects, but this time this covers the time period up to the point when all of the benefits have been realised. Okay, finally then, let's look at portfolio life cycle, a somewhat different diagram as you're about to see. So the portfolio life cycle is less likely to have a defined start and finish, as they are a continual cycle of coordinating projects and programs. Hope you can see that. It's a bit like herding cats. When do you actually start and when do you actually finish? However, we do know that within a portfolio, we will have a period of time where we'll be performing strategic planning. And then we'll have a period of time where programs and projects deliver within the portfolio. So step 1 would be to define what programs and what projects and what business as usual areas are evaluated and selected within the portfolio. Remember, it's highly likely we're not interested in all business or operational areas. Here we're evaluating and selecting the appropriate ones and defining them so that the projects and programs can be delivered within the portfolio. However, step number 2 is to categorize. This is where you may organise the programs and projects into sub-portfolios to align their characteristics. Much in the same way, if you will, as we looked at projects within a program and aligned that within tranches. Step 3. Prioritise. The programs and projects within the portfolio are prioritised by appropriate criteria, that could be just about anything, to ensure sufficient resources are available. Remember, that's the whole point of portfolios, to help manage bottlenecks. So prioritising them will simply mean putting them in appropriate schedule, making sure that the individual projects and the programs deliver their benefits at the right time and the right place. Step 4 is balance. The portfolio of programs and projects are balanced in terms of risk, resources, cash flow and impact. We covered that when I described the portfolio earlier, but it's important that you see that the portfolio lifecycle, although it's not a simple start and finish like the previous diagrams, is a cycle here of carrying out definition, categorization, prioritizing and balancing, and this will be ongoing as these arrows are intended to portray. There's a final step, of course, and that's strategic delivery, delivering the right programs and projects at the right time for the right reasons. Well, that brings us nicely to the end of Module 2, Program and Portfolio Management. So thank you for your time and attention. So in this module, you've learned to differentiate between the management of projects, programs and portfolios. You are now able to outline or describe the characteristics of program management and how it relates to strategic change. You can list the main challenges to a project manager when managing within a program, and you understand the when and why of using portfolio management. So thank you again for your time and attention. Don't forget to carry out the module exercises, and we'll meet again in Module 3.